Good evening and welcome to the Kim B. Davis Show. I'm your host, Kim B. Davis, and this evening we have one of our favorite psychologists on, Dr. Angela Celeste May. She is a forensic, clinical, and organizational psychologist. Good evening, Dr. Angela Celeste May. How are you?
I'm fantastic, Kim. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. So I have
Excellent, excellent.
I have been so excited and wanting to talk about this particular topic. And it just seems like 2020 is a gift that won't stop giving. And so
Yes,
this evening, let's talk
yes.
about mental health. Is it just physical? Is it more than that? Is it supernatural? So, as I said, 2020 is that gift that just keeps on giving. It's like that cousin that won't leave. They show up one day with their bags, and you look around and you like, well, 3 holidays have passed. Aren't you gonna leave? And it's like, oh, you still here. But in all seriousness,
Yes.
we have COVID. We're looking at potentially another shutdown happening because we see it overseas, especially in Europe. I believe France went into lockdown today, and I believe it was Germany. And somebody just came out of lockdown. I can't remember who it was. We still have
Mm-hmm.
unrest. We still have violence. We have just recently found out in the last couple of weeks that there were domestic terrorists who were plotting to kidnap and kill potentially two sitting governors. One, our governor from Michigan, Governor Gretchen Whitmer,
Yeah.
and the governor of Virginia, Governor Ralph Northam. We have an election that is days away. You have people who in Michigan are planning to open carrying your guns to the polls. I
Mm.
I'm not arguing with people on social media because I want to keep my mental sanity and peace intact. But I keep wanting to say to someone, what happens when there's a shooting? How do you account for that?
Exactly. Mhm.
But
Good question.
and it is a good question, and that's not the
Hmm.
question that I want to ask for you. But we've seen since this pandemic has started that cases of anxiety, depression, mental breakdowns have increased. Now there's
Yes.
something called COVID depression. That's a particular depression that's specifically related to COVID-19 and all the things that surround it. My
Hmm.
question to you is for people who begin to hear voices, for people who see things, for people who are experiencing extreme breakdowns. Many people will say, it's the stress of it's depression. They need to change their ways of thinking. You need to eat better. You need to exercise. You need to do those things. Is it just physical, or is there something more going on?
Ah, that's a very good question. It's a very important question, and you're at. I know that you know you're asking it on behalf of a lot of people. I'm pretty sure we can agree you're asking that question on behalf of even more people, even more than you're
Yeah.
probably aware of or that we're aware of. It's a complicated question because there are always, of course, individual circumstances.
Mhm.
So I never give short answers.
And it's
But
okay.
I'll give for both. So I'll give the short answer and then give the details. So the short answer is when you say, is it just physical or is there something else going on? My answer is yes. That's the short answer. Because, like I said, there are individual circumstances and varying situations. So if we like kind of take them one by one, starting with the physical and some of the advice that you just mentioned that people will often say,
Mhm.
which has to do with changing your ways of being in terms of your physicality, like you just said. It's always good advice, no matter, almost no matter what the issue, to move a little more if you can safely, to eat a little healthier, all of those things help us not only physically, but mentally, psychologically. We're talking about holistic health,
Mhm.
So whatever we do in one area of our lives affects us, in all the other areas. So um, it for some, I'll put it this way: for some, the origin or the reason for hearing and seeing things that maybe others do not see around you may be physical.
Mhm.
So when and if it is physical, that can be multi-layered, just that part by itself. So if it's physical, that can mean a few things. We talk about stress, like you all often speak of, because we are as a world, and I'm going to say as a country, as a world, we're under a lot of unusual stress. Um, but it's kind of like when I'm teaching my psychology classes and we talk about the nervous system and we're talking about stressors and things like that. One of the questions I always throw out is, is there such thing as good stress? Is there
Mhm.
positive stress? So, and I asked that to define terms and to get some clarity. So first, because we're talking about stress and anxiety, let's start with understanding that the nature of being and just living lives day to day, it not only involves stress, it requires stress. So, for example, the fact that we're both sitting, standing, we're sitting like upright, right? So
Mhm.
we're upright. We don't feel it, but we're under pressure just sitting upright with good posture because gravity is pressing on us. That's just being in the world. So if you have no stress, you're dead. Basically, you're deceased. So um, there's a term some use. It's called eustress, which
Mhm.
is spelled EU stress, and that's supposed to depict kind of like the positive stress. So having a baby can be, a wonderful, exciting adventure, as you well know, but it most certainly has some stress attached to getting ready for the new baby, this new life and all. Getting married, one would hope it's a good thing. It's, you're matched with the love of your life or whatever it may be. And so that's an example of good stress, but it's a positive event, but there's a lot involved in it. And it too is a stressor. So a lot of times when we kind of in our society throw around the term stress a lot, and we say it to mean negative things because often it is, but not always. So um, when stress in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. We need it to help us get things done sometimes. We need it to help or spark us into some movement sometimes. The fight or flight reaction, where we may need it to get away or to fight or to survive. That, all that's part of, stressors.
Mhm.
When we say stress, typically though in our societies, when we say stress, what we're really saying is too much stress and negative stress,
Mhm.
too much of it and negative. So, getting back, of course, to this year and all that's been going on, it is a term I've used before: compounded.
Mhm.
It's compounded. So that's the too much stress part.
Mhm.
It's coming, just like you just listed. It's coming from multiple directions,
Mhm.
and it's not seemingly nonstop.
Right.
It's nonstop. So that includes the fallout, the varying aspects of the fallout from COVID-19, from not, just not knowing what this is, knowing that it's something that can be deadly. Just the not knowing is its own level of stress, trying to learn to cope with it. And then for those who have gotten ill, for those who are trying to survive it, for those who have had loss from, all of that, and that's just the virus, let alone the
Right.
other things you name.
Mhm.
So it's compounded. There's a not knowing aspect to it, because even as we're learning to sort of learning how to get through day to day with this as our circumstance for now,
Mhm.
there's still an unknown aspect, because we're always, it's kind of like hypervigilance almost, always kind of looking around, like making sure that I'm safe, that my loved ones are safe. Did you wipe this down?
Yes.
So it's trying to find that balance. So it's just incoming, like from all directions. So because of that, yes, there's a physical component when we respond to the negative stress like that, of any kind. Our heart rate can go up, our pulse can race, whether we're aware of it or not.
Mhm.
Not just a vocalist, but as a vocal teacher, I'm even more, and as a speaker too, this as a speaker, I'm maybe more aware than a lot of folks who don't speak for a living or sing for a living, whatever, of breathing. So
Mhm.
oftentimes our breathing gets very shallow
Yeah.
when we're nervous and we're not even aware of it. We're not really breathing deeply.
Mhm.
And shallow breathing over time adds even more to the stress because your body and your cells and it's not getting oxygen like it needs to. So there's definitely a physical component to what we're calling stress. I mean, it is stress, but that negative, I'll call it stress.
Mhm.
And it's, if it's not, stress can be a good thing as far as it, like I said, fight or flight. It helps you get out of negative situations, or it should. Hopefully, it's supposed to help. But we're not supposed to live in it, and we're sort of living in it in a certain kind of way and trying to find balance.
Mhm.
So because of that, it becomes the outcomes of those things, the pulse racing, the heart, the blood pressure may spiking a little bit, all the, it has a cumulative effect because it's like, it's just coming, and we have to, work maybe a little harder than normal
Mhm.
to find those spaces, as we've talked about before, to take care of ourselves, spaces for meditation, spaces to, so that we can, bring those things down. Um, and so on the physical side, the mind, our brains, our minds, our bodies is a fascinating machine, really designed to help us not just survive, but thrive. Our brain is designed to protect us.
Mhm.
And so, as we know, one of the ways that your brain may protect you is, when we hear stories and may know of some people have read stories about people who, for whom, if they've gone through a lot of trauma,
Mhm.
their brain kind of like blocks some things out.
Yeah.
Some things we just need to block out to maintain, another version of that or another incarnation of something like that can be the mind. This is the physical part of the answer. The mind, kind of like developing these sort of like sensory experiences. By
Mhm.
sensory, we mean the five senses, right? Sight, smell,
Mhm.
taste, sound, touch. I'm like remembering the five senses. So the body and the mind will compensate, will come up with ways to soothe the nervous system back down, to kind of bring the blood pressure back down, and sometimes that can manifest in hearing or seeing voices or people or whatever that other people may not see. It may be that you are hearing, your grandmother's voice, and she may have passed away 15 years ago, or you may, hear something that is telling you, baby, it'll be all right, or you see her or have some of those visions. People have experienced that in times, most definitely in times of the greatest stress, greatest fear, greatest anxiety, and it can be physically like manifested. The brain kind of comes up with that again as a mechanism for the body kind of compensating and helping us cope, basically. So there could be a physical part of that, and there are other aspects too. Depends on what's going on in the endocrine system, hormone, all kinds of stuff that can be going on as a result of anxiety and too much negative stress that can trigger the brain, the physical brain and mind, to see, smell, experience things that the world may say is not real, quote unquote. Um, but it's because perhaps your body and system is working in overdrive.
Mhm.
So there's definitely there is that does exist. It goes on. I would divide this answer into like physical, psychological slash mental, and
Mhm.
spiritual.
Mhm.
So the way you first framed the question was, is it physical or something else? And I said yes. So that's some of the physical parts.
Okay.
Um, we'll save the spiritual for last. So the psychological slash mental part I kind of touched on, as far as how our bodies and brains can kind of manufacture some of this stuff. Um, but of course we know, in a scientific community and in a Western world that does diagnose mental conditions, etc., that oftentimes the first thought even lay people may have who are not in the mental health professions, as well as EMDs and others. First thought they may have is, are they having a psychotic break?
Yeah.
Are they having a mental breakdown? Actually, a breakdown it too is kind of a late term, that we toss around. There's no actual diagnosis called breakdown, but of course, like a psychotic break.
Mm-hmm.
Or are they suffering from schizophrenia or some of the other mental and psychological diagnoses that that deal with hallucinations? So that can be a reason for experiencing hearing voices,
Mm-hmm.
or saying things.
Mm-hmm.
And I, as a psychologist, not that all psychologists think the same way, but as a psychologist and a humanistic trained psychologist, I'll put it that way, my own personal philosophy, I've never been one to run to medication. And so if someone is experiencing hallucinations and it appears to be due to some kind of a psychotic break or mental, fracturing of some kind, and there's still a full psychological evaluation and the therapeutic part that is involved in the treatment, if treatment is what is needed, in addition to, and not always throwing, just pills. You never want, I should say throwing pills, not always
A lot of
prescribing
people
pills, I'll
do.
put it that way.
Right.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
some do. And the most, how can I put it, ethical,
Mm-hmm.
the most ethical, I would say, of approaches from any MD, I say, or psychiatrists are MDs, of course, but I mean a general practitioner or a psychiatrist, any MD that is prescribing medication. The most ethical approach, of course, is still to have conversations with that person, work through what is going on, developing the coping, what triggered this, all of that. So that kind of goes hand in hand. So for each of these instances, like I said, it's so individualized. So for each of these instances, it depends on what's triggering it, what came before. And I'm gonna finish this part before we go to part 3, which is the spiritual part. But you want to really listen to the person and try as best you can to understand the surround. And this is for ourselves too. If any individual experiences this for her or himself, have support around you. Do think it through, talk it through with someone who's trusted. And one of the things I was going to say is it doesn't have to be a permanent situation. Sometimes it's a temporary thing. Sometimes it's what our bodies, our minds are doing to temporarily cope with something, to get through something, yeah. So all of that. So it can be physical, definitely, due to the stress. And some of that, we think in terms of what can I say, pathologizing. But some of that, if you think about what some of the painful things that people are going through, some of that makes sense, and there's also the issue of the nature of it. A lot of times we just speak in generalities and we'll say, oh, they're hearing voices or they're seeing things, and, oh, get them to a doctor. Well, there can be seeing things and there can be saying things, or hearing things and hearing things. If it is a voice that, like I said, the voice of your grandma or something like that, and you find it soothing in that moment, but it is not ongoing, it's not chronic, it only happened at that one time, and you really leaned in and needed that shoulder at that moment when nobody else was around or understood you, and you're moving on in a healthy way. Well, that's not somebody that necessarily needs a whole prescription. So there's that also. There is parsing out, well, what does that mean? Let's describe the experience and get a better understanding, rather than just stop at they heard some voices. So, that's all very important. And then there's the spiritual. There's the spiritual explanation, spiritual reason. I was, when you first told me that, you want to talk about this, well, you and I talked about, this topic offline, so to speak, a little bit. And I did a little bit of just like, kind of read up a little bit on, I know my experiences, I know some things I want to say about it, but I was just, curious to see what was out there. And I have to admit, this is not something I'd like delved into a lot outside of personal experiences and those in my circle and around me. And, but in terms of the research part of it, I hadn't really delved like that. And I have to admit, I was pleasantly surprised, because I know that, not surprisingly, as we kind of touched on before, heretofore, in the last several years or whatever, not too long ago, it was assumed, shall we say, by more perhaps Western societies, physicians and whatnot, or those trained in the West, that it must necessarily be a negative issue, a sickness of some kind, and not actually maybe the voice of God, or maybe a spiritual, experience that you're having. I definitely can see the positive impact, as we've talked about before, of more, it's not new information by any means, but more diverse voices in the research landscape, more diverse voices who are actually asking these questions and then looking into these things in an empirical way. So I was pleasantly surprised to find the writings and some of the and from the research community who have surveyed people and done qualitative research and interviewed folks, so that I know from my own experience as a psychologist, definitely as a Black psychologist, but as a psychologist, I have heard in the last number of years, which I find very refreshing, more of an openness in the field to consider that there are some real spiritual experiences going on with people who hear and see things, and that's not, doesn't have to be attached to schizophrenia or some other, psychotic issue. So there's more research out there to back that up than to, I guess, go hand in hand with that than I was expecting. So that was quite pleasantly, I was pleasantly surprised to see that. But no doubt there's a spiritual explanation. I say that from personal experience. But I also say that, I can refer people to look that up for themselves, and there are different articles out there. And there's a young lady who actually just did a dissertation in 2019, just last year, specifically looking at the spiritual experiences, prayer lives, and the hearing of voices from the African American community in Tennessee, actually. And from my own experiences, and this is something I'll say to people, for those who may doubt, is that real? Is that real? A couple of things that I was thinking about. One is, this experience. Well, let me back up for a second. One of the things I always like to say is, how do you, when people are looking for you or me to confirm for them, well, how do you know that's spiritual? Or how do you know, sometimes they're wanting confirmation. They want to hear that. Other times it's because, they're already doubting. It's like, prove it to me, prove it. And one of the ways I answer is to say, well, prove to me that you love your mom. How do you prove it? Well, I do this, I do. Yes, but how do you measure that? Let's quantify that. Then you get into the quote unquote fuzzier areas of feelings. Everything cannot be measured in a way that would satisfy science. And in my opinion, nor should it be. Absolutely. Because we're given these wonderful brains, and we're still, like my mom used to say, we don't even use, what do they say, like a quarter of the, or less, of the capacity. So there's more to learn. We're still learning, but I find it unfortunate when I do run across a scientist, fellow social scientist, or anyone in the scientific community who suffers from the arrogance, suffers from the arrogance of believing that we must know. Do continue to explore. Let's see what answers we can find. That's wonderful, expand the universe. But to this day, we still don't have an exact measurement on the universe.
Nope.
I don't think that we will. Well, maybe we will, maybe, but I think that's part of being human, and that's a lovely part of being human, to be able to let go enough to say, maybe I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And nor you get a little God complex in there. I think when you just need to know everything. I mean, it's good to ask, but definitely quantifying love and what that is, and this experience. You know how this as a mom. You know what it's like to feel connected to somebody, someone that you really love, you're close to, so that when they're not there, you know how you. I don't know. You maybe you've had this experience, but you know how I have read stories of people who will say, and it's not uncommon, their loved one, their husband, child, whatever, is like in one state, and you're in another state,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the middle of the night, and you wake, and
Something's happening. Mm-hmm.
that something happened. That person just had an accident. That phone hadn't rung yet. Nobody told you that. You just know.
Mm-hmm.
That human experience where we just say, I just knew. Whatever I just knew.
Mm-hmm.
So there's definite connectedness, spiritual connectedness,
Mm-hmm.
that we have experienced on various levels. We may not be able to quantify it, but we can investigate it, look into it. But definitely it can be spiritual. It can be I believe in the voice. Well, I don't even like to say believe, because that's like saying, do you believe your name is Kim? Do you believe it? You're like, no, I know my name.
It is Kim.
But you believe. You're like, excuse me, it's Kim. You know that. So let me stop saying I believe. I know the voice of God.
Mm-hmm.
I know God's voice when I hear it. I've experienced it for a long time and blessed to.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that occurs. I have absolutely no doubt about it. And I've had multiple of those great grammar, multiple of those kinds of experiences myself, and those I know of many people, as I'm sure you do, around you and others who shared similar kinds of experiences, where they either know something without a doubt, and that's exactly what occurred, with no evidence, no indication, no nothing, because they felt that connectedness, or they heard a voice or a direction. I know some try to explain it away as, well, on some level you must have known, or sometimes perhaps, but oftentimes no. No, absolutely. So,
Mm-hmm.
and it's much more common as well, I would say, than I think we even know, because people in some circles talk about it on a regular basis,
Mm-hmm.
but some people don't. It can feel taboo to do that, and people do fear being labeled. But I think I know that's just part of human experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you said a couple interesting things, and I'm going to share a personal story really quick. So I know for me that if I smell a particular scent, it can take me back to a point in time where I feel like I'm in that moment. I can see it, I can hear it, I can remember whatever I was doing that day, even if I was a
Mhm.
child. And I think sometimes people mistake, as you said, that being something where, no, that's too much. They're uncomfortable with it. You're saying,
Mhm.
no, I'm just being reminded of something, which could be God's way of pointing me in the direction of something that I need to do. It,
Absolutely.
it's possible. So when I had my second son in 2012, I went in for my yearly checkup. My son was about a year. My doctor, they do all your tests, and we're doing, checking the breast, what have you. She found a
Mhm.
lump, and and it was funny because my doctor and I have known each other for many years, so we were just chatting, and she felt it, and we both stopped at the same time, and she kept talking. And so I kept
Mhm.
talking to her because, I think she was like, I don't want to alarm her. And so then when we stopped,
Mhm.
she said, Did you feel that? I said, I did. And she looked at me and said, What is that? I said, I don't know. I was going to ask you. And she started to laugh and said, You got to go get this checked out. And so here I am with a year-old baby that I just
Mhm.
finished, or he was probably a little bit over a year that I had just finished breastfeeding. So of course you start to think, oh, if this is breast cancer, is this the aggressive? I'm already planning
Mhm.
my funeral before I can get out of my
Oh,
husband. I'm like, okay, I need you to do this, this, and this. I need you to make sure that the boys are okay.
oh,
I'm going to leave notes, when they turn 16,
oh.
18, 25 on their way. I have all these things planned out in my head, and I haven't sat down to pray yet because in my head, I'm like, okay, if this is what's getting ready to happen, these are the next steps. And it was interesting because I went to the doctor and he said, "You're too young and you don't have any history of breast cancer in your family." And I said, "We don't." And he said, "Well, I want you to come back. We got to do an ultrasound and some other things." And so it was
Mhm.
interesting because I came home and I was in the kitchen and I was preparing dinner. And I can tell you, between my stove and my kitchen countertop, I heard a voice as clear as I'm talking to you that said, "You're fine. Don't worry." That's all
Mhm.
the voice said to me. And I stopped and I sort of looked around like, okay, God, was that you? And I heard it again, like, "Fine, don't worry." I didn't say anything because I was scared. And I remember going back to the doctor and my husband, telling people, just keep prayers and all these different things. And I remember sitting there in my head thinking, but God said I'm going to be all right. And so when the doctor walked back in, he said, "You're fine." He said the exact same thing that
The
God
same wording.
said. He said
Mhm.
the same thing. And he told me, he said, "It's a mammary gland. You have apparently have large glands. You just finished breastfeeding,
Mhm.
all these things." And I said, "Look at you, God. You funny." I said, "Okay, I heard you. I know that was your voice. I got it." So
Yeah.
as you said, when you hear the voice, whether it's your
Mhm.
grandmother, it comes in the voice of someone you know, or you just distinctly know it's God. If someone asks me,
Mhm.
say, "Well, how can you prove it?" I say, "I can't prove it, but I can tell you with every fiber of my being, I knew where it came
Mhm.
from. I knew where it
Absolutely.
came from." And when I was able to finally sit down and pray and cry and release the fear that I had, God kept telling me, "It's
Mhm.
gonna be okay. This is not where your story ends. I got work for you." And I was like, "Oh wait, okay, what am I supposed to do?"
Yes, yes,
So
yes,
I
yeah. That's wonderful.
It is, but I think you're right that we have to examine the physical, the psychological, and the spiritual. I know
Yeah.
people that work in mental health and they tell me, these extreme stories where people have been abused or they've been molested or something
Right, right.
violent.
Mm-hmm.
I had someone who said to me, um, they saw a serial killer. And I was like, "Really?" So, I'm a storyteller. So I'm like, "Give me details because this might get worked into a story."
Right,
But
right.
the story that he told me scared me. It was a young man who was under the age of 18 and had written some manifesto essentially that said he wanted to cut his mother and his sister's breasts off and
Oh my
bathe in
goodness.
their blood. And I thought, "Oh," I said, "Is he hearing voices?" They said, "No, but he's real spooky. He just looks at you and you
Mhm.
feel your skin crawl." And so
Mhm.
one of the things that we had talked about earlier, I'm like, is it demons, do you think? Or is it the spiritual world sort of touching on them because maybe they're preoccupied? Because I know there have
Mhm.
been cases where I've heard of people who said specifically, like, I never knew that this was a thing, that some people won't take a bath because they believe there's a demon in the water and they can't take a bath.
Uh,
Have you heard that?
I, it sounds like that story sounds vaguely familiar. Like maybe I've heard it somewhere along the way. It's not anything I've heard like on a regular basis, but I may have heard that. I may have heard that. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, no, no. And I was just gonna say
Uh,
it's interesting to me how people will
Mhm.
have these these beliefs about things that
Mhm.
we take for granted. And so one of the
Mhm.
questions I was asking this person, I said, "Will this person drink water?" They said no. They won't even drink water. They would not bathe. Like they were scared of
Oh,
anything that
person.
had water because this person believed that there was a demon that would
Demon
come out
in
of
it.
the water to hurt him. There's been
Oh.
other people who I've heard quite a few times the Archangel Michael
Mhm.
versus Satan are battling over
Mhm.
someone's soul. And you know, when you start to hear similar stories, you start to wonder, is there something going
Mhm. Well, couple things. Well, first of all, um, I did when I was speaking of the spiritual, I did speak of the soothing, calming, but of course there is the not so positive aspects of spiritual life, as with every other part of life. Um, I would, for the, I as a psychologist or even just as a person, I would want to like for that person who's scared of the water, for example, and I have heard of not taking a bath so much, not that so much, but general things like that, Um, when I have heard of that or dealt with that at any way, usually they have been suffering from some kind of a belief system or psychosis delusion.
on?
Because this is the thing to keep in mind since we're talking about spiritual. I'll put my spiritual hat
Yeah.
on. um, it's called spiritual because they're spirits.
Hmm.
Hollywood has them living in water.
Hmm.
They're spirits. Water is something that's on the earth.
Right.
Spirits don't have to be confined to some liquid.
That's true.
So, it's kind of like the devil is always depicted, whatever. Hey, the devil is that CEO, the devil is that cute little girl. This is spirits. I mean, not the, what I'm saying. I mean, there's a broader ability to traverse the universe than a cup of water.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so, the Bible talks about demons. There have been those who have interpreted some of those demonic stories as, mental illness, but maybe they didn't have the language for it, or that's what they called it at the time, etc., or the culture. I think most definitely I am not one who thinks that spirituality is confined only to the positive, and there's no, there are the two sides of life, yin yang, and all that. So, it, in those, just like my answers with the others, in those situations, it sounds like it could be a diagnosable psychological mental issue, but I do know that just as there are negative stressors that pull on us, there are negative spiritual stressors as well that push on us and pull on us. Um, and it can influence the thinking and the behaving just like positive spiritual aspects do. um, when people talk about there are a lot of beliefs out there, like you said. um, and I tell you, there's one. I love the way Richard, my husband, I love the way he put it. I thought he made a very good point, because we're Christians and so we follow the scripture, the Old Testament, the New Testament. He made a really, really good point. God, all that God is, and for that matter, Satan, but all that God is, it can't fit into that book.
Exactly.
It's a living document because it's fascinating to me. I've just going through school and taking classes in religion. You learn about other types of religions and their things that the belief systems, whatever. What I find endlessly fascinating about the scripture, the Bible that we study, and why it's called the Living Bible, because it really and truly, no matter how much you grow, there's always another meaning to that lesson and more layers and more layers. So all that God is so big, he doesn't just like fit within that. That's a part of the story, and it is a guidebook, and it just has the answers for so many things, no matter where we are.
Right.
Um, but by the same token, like I said, I do not want to suffer from the illness of arrogance. I'm going to say, well, no, these things. eyes have not seen. So can there be demons running around? Absolutely. There's some reason, I definitely believe, I'm not one who doesn't believe in the devil. I believe that there is that negative spiritual force. But I will say that, like I said, there are references to, like, what is it, the demon or whatever, of water, like, and of air and of whatever, etc. I don't know if any of us know, even those who really, study this, know the full nature of all of that. But like I said, I will say that any a suggestion that a specific demon just like lives in all water. Well, my answer is God is bigger than, is it God can't handle that demon? So that's my universal answer. First of all, God can handle that too. But then also these things are beyond the bounds of our limited thinking. And they are bigger than us in so many ways. So just as I know God's voice, I know that there's a devil element, a negative spirit and spirits out there who will try to push us to do things that are not healthy. And never touching water is probably not healthy. So regardless of not regardless, I mean, it is important, but I was gonna say that whatever the origin is, we want to call that a demonic influence or whatever the case, it's not healthy, it's not good for you. So it's probably something that you want to kind of come away from, or get help, moving away from. But I just think there's no, I marvel that there's no aspect of our lives that God is not interested in, which I find that fascinating. Like which mascara should I get, Lord? Get that one. Okay, cool. and it works out.
True. Yes.
It's so cool. It's just like, like everything. So we're told not to. Yes, there's a fight going on, like you were talking about. What is it? You said, was it Michael
and the devil?
Fighting for the.
We don't fight against physical. We fight against the spiritual.
Right, and principalities and all that. Yeah. There's so much power to that statement, because we are in all of those areas. The physical, the mental, psychological, spiritual. All of those areas are fighting on the same, in many ways, I think, the same battlefield. The like fighting for our focus. To get our focus, our mind. And we're told to be at peace. There is a level of peace where you can say, and people are at different levels with their growth. But if a person can grow to the point where you can say, well, there may be a demon in that water, but I'll still visit with God and find out if I should take a bath with the demon, and I'll just be in the bath together. Lord, take care of me. So that can be a long journey to get to that. But it's a beautiful place to arrive. It's a beautiful place to arrive. Yeah. I think that for as many, every time we get answers, there's more questions. But again, like I say, that's why I'm just fascinated by our scripture, because there's stories and answers in there, for a reason.
There are.
For a reason.
Read 10 years ago. You can read it now. And as you said,
yes,
entirely, not necessarily that the meaning is different, but you find more layers that you can pull out that apply to your life. And you
really do.
Wow.
Right, exactly. That's true. That is true. Yeah, that's so true. And that I think that I know that the mistake sometimes people make in not understanding, or maybe people are agnostic, or they're trying to make up their mind. A lot of times you will hear people say is, but I'm a thinking person, and I'm not going to just follow along blindly. Well, the Bible actually says, come, let's reason together. Like I didn't give you a brain so that you wouldn't use it. Like I actually want to hear how you think it through, and let's have this conversation, So even, so much of the misnomers are not applicable.
Right.
That this really is a thinking person, faith walk.
Yeah, it is.
Thinking is a thing, but
I'm sorry. I was just
no, I was just gonna say it's. Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was just I was just gonna say
The nature of Zoom in today's
exactly. We need
right.
great conversation. But you know, when people will take a scripture from the Old Testament and use it and say, God said, thou shall not, whatever it is. And you're like,
Right.
you got to go back over to the New Testament and then look to see where does that apply and harmonize the
Right.
scripture so you understand. Because remember, the Old Testament is the law, but we're under the new
And
covenant. And a lot of people don't understand
exactly.
that. And when you say that to them, they look at you like, really?
Right.
God just said, don't
I
eat.
just want to stay under a curse. I just want to stay under.
I know. I'm like, that's much work. I'm not trying to do that. Not trying to do that. But finish
Yes.
your statement. I'm sorry.
Well, I was gonna say it is an interesting fine line. Uh, we were given a brain for a reason. We were to use it and explore and learn and ask questions and everything. But it's like to have that and you know, to develop that ability to have that and trust at the same time. It doesn't mean that either is supposed to be truncated in some way. But you know, I one of the things I remember I said years ago is the beginning of, I'm not the first one, I'm sure people have put it in different ways, but the beginning of wisdom, or when you really know you're on the right track, is when you start shrugging.
Yes.
Like you sit down, go somewhere and sit, like, or folks used to say, go somewhere and sit down and start shrugging and say, you know, I don't know.
Right.
I really don't know. And that's when you start to be a little more open and, you know, to maybe some of these answers. But yeah, there's no doubt that, you know, I'm just going to speak for my own opinion. I know that people, a lot of times, you know, in seeking answers, trying to find answers and stuff, not sure what the being may be or not be who created all this. And so the, you know, the popular thing is to say the universe. I myself am not looking to the universe to give me anything. I prefer the maker of the universe. I'm thinking that's like the top boss, right up in there. And so I say the maker of the universe. But I just think it's good to keep asking questions, but do so openly and cultivate a heart and a mind of openness and acceptance about some things. And by acceptance, I mean, first of all, everything can't be measured with the limited tools that we have. And by limited, I'm including Einstein. Like we're wonderful creatures, but we cannot find the end of the universe at this time.
Exactly.
So that, you know, it's not a negative thing. It's just like, you know, I think that's how we just keep growing, ask questions, and some things you have to, not to say you have to accept, you know, you're free not to, but some things there are some laws of nature.
Mm-hmm.
There just are. You know, rain doesn't go up. Like, you know,
it doesn't. Unless
that's an evaporation process.
Right.
Yes. But it doesn't rain up, like it actually rains down.
Unless it's a horror movie.
Unless it's a horror movie. And that's part of why it's horror, because it does go against the law. But I mean, the sun rises in the east.
Yes.
Like it just, and people in working so hard to find their voice or feeling, and some of this may come from the way they were raised. You know, we know that sometimes people have used religion as a bludgeon. You know, there's all kinds of walks of life, and people have, like, you know, some people have equated certain religions or sects of Christianity, because there's diversity within Christianity as well, of course, as just, you know, the religion of no, you can't do you can't do thou shalt not. And one of the things I think that we miss is a lot of those thou shalt nots are for protection.
Yes.
They're actually for protection. You know, those are loving things. They're not just, you know, it's confining. You know, a lot of them are for protection. We you know, you can call it karma, if you come from another perspective, or you reap what you sow or whatever. But you get what you put out in some manner. You may not always recognize it, but you get what you put out. The sun rises in the east, and rain actually comes down on us. So there are some things, people, you know, everything is not absolute. No. Some things are. They
absolutely.
just are, the sun's not rising in the like
In
south.
fact, yeah, no, it's not. The stars
It's
still come
not.
out at night. They don't come out
The
during the
start, yeah.
day.
There they are. There it is. There
Mhm.
it is. So rather than, and that's part of what I mean by accepting some things, maybe until we know otherwise, some things might actually be etched in stone. I've seen one of the questions I ask is, well, why does that bother you?
Right.
It,
Hmm.
it can feel confining, or well, like have the conversation. That's part of the being open. Let's have the conversation. Why does that bother you so much? Some things maybe are etched in stone. They really aren't changing it. Some things are changing, global warming and all, but so far rain is coming down.
Yes. And we can't control it. We can't manipulate it. We can't do anything with it, despite what Hollywood says. And you're right. You gave that example of Hollywood because I know one particular movie I thought of was Poltergeist. And when they were showing the supernatural world, they came out of this goo. And Ghostbusters did the same thing. There was like ectoplasm.
Right, exactly.
That is true. Like, okay, and I've always been one like, how do we know that? Like, has somebody actually seen that? I don't know.
I don't know. It ain't. A lot of it ain't like we think. A lot of it just it ain't like we think.
I agree.
A lot of it ain't. Yeah. It's just endlessly fascinating though.
It
It
is.
really, really is. It
So we
is.
always
And there's so much more there than we realize. Oh, go ahead.
absolutely no. I was just gonna say we always have a great conversation, but our time.
We do. I know. I got another thing. I just love talking to you.
And I love having you on the show and talking to you because you always give us good information. So I got to get this last
Thank you.
in. So I know something I struggle with are thoughts,
Oh, yes.
negative thoughts. Sometimes, especially right now, as you said, the stress of the pandemic, the stress of watching the news, which many people, if you can stop watching the news, be intentional, give yourself, a certain amount of time. I have about 10 minutes and then I have to turn it off because my nerves
Mhm.
feel it. And sometimes, as you said, those negative stressors can play with your mind and make you
Yeah, absolutely.
start to have thoughts that keep running in a loop. That negative Nancy can get in there and start telling you, see, you can't go to the store. You're going to be sitting here and you don't like this. And you're not a good mother and you can't keep your house clean and you get,
Oh,
I'm just saying, this isn't anything
yeah,
necessarily for me, but these are things that I read that women are talking about.
absolutely.
Everybody's in their leggings. Everyone has gained weight. No one is doing, some of the things that they had used to do. Everybody is stressed
Mhm.
out. And so when those thoughts that you have about yourself become negative, for me specifically, when I start to whenever I'm doing a project, whether it's a podcast, it's a new book, it's a book, whatever it is, and I start to
Mhm.
think, why am I doing this again? And that negative Nancy, I'm like, okay, God, I know this is a negative thought. Train up your thoughts. You know,
That's right.
think on things that are good. And so I'm like,
That's right.
I gotta get rid of that thought, and I have to turn it around. Where has God brought me from? You know,
Yes.
as you
Yeah,
talk, as you said
absolutely.
in a few shows, having a gratitude journal, remembering what you're
Mhm.
grateful for, what you're thankful for, what brings you joy.
Yes.
So, having said all
Hmm.
that, because we have so much going on, what are some tips or some tools that people can use to help keep anxiety away, to help keep depression away,
Hmm.
and to get on a healthier path?
Well, in addition to like those things that you said, I've mentioned before, one of the things, I don't know if I mentioned this before or not, but I read this years ago in a glamour magazine. It was one of the best pieces of advice. I love it. But it wasn't like a little glamour, a little thing. And I never forgot it because I started doing it myself. I had to be in my 20s, 18, 19, 21, something like that. And I started doing this, and I told a couple other people to do it. And it's as simple as How many of us, when you look in the mirror, smile?
Mm.
And what I add to that, and they were saying smile at yourself in the mirror. And what I add to that is, if that feels weird or sounds crazy, that's a little like ding, ding, ding. That's a little red flag.
Yep.
And I mention that because one of the things that I encourage people to do, especially as like for myself, I always love working out at home. I've always been like a home exerciser, so I've taken like the workout class here and there, or I've gone to the gym at times, whatever. But I always, my main thing is working out at home,
Mm-hmm.
and I've learned to be my own cheerleader. My own coach, positive coach. And that means because everybody's different. I know a lot of times people say, well, I need somebody to push me. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But just as we're born with a penchant toward like certain tastes, some people are like more salty, some people are like, sweet, whatever. Even though we may be certain, like born with a tendency towards certain tastes in terms of physical taste in our mouth, still, I know I have found from my own experience that our taste habits are often habits.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ways you can tell that is if you go to like another culture and they're like, oh yeah, we dine on worms, and you're like, oh, like, no, we don't. No, we don't. But if you speak to someone who immigrated to that area,
Mm-hmm.
and they learn to eat that, to adopt that diet. So our eating is a habit. And by the same token, our thinking, our thought process, our habits. So you used a perfect word a little while ago, and you said be intentional. Be intentional about turning that, limiting your news time. Same thing. Be intentional. It may feel ridiculous at first, whatever. Smile in the mirror. Smile at yourself. Treat yourself. We're talking about the Bible again, right? So, love thy brother as thyself. Nobody's paying attention to the thyself part.
That's right.
You're supposed to love yourself so that you have something to model the behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you not? Like, smile at yourself. That's first thing. Develop, be intentional and conscious about be developing the habit of thinking wonderful things about yourself. List the things you're thankful for. Look at where you've grown, things that you've grown from, what you're thankful for, your talents and gifts. Smile at yourself, even if you don't feel like it. I mean, you don't want to put on a fake facade, like, oh, I don't feel so whatever. And take a moment. You have to stay there for maybe another minute and a half, maybe 3, and say, but you know what? Give yourself that smile and develop that self-talk.
Mm-hmm.
Practice becoming your own cheerleader. And it should be a daily practice, like you practice anything else, like you practice your piano lessons or practice. So that when those negative Nancy, like you said, comes in, you're developing those muscles, those thought muscles and habits. So you have that to fall back on, and you practice catching yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, just like you said, oh, you know what, let me not gonna, Lord, talk to the Lord, develop that prayer habit, whatever your belief system is. But it's really a habit. It's really it's a habit, and it's one we need to be intentional about. If you're not that way naturally, you just work on it like you work on anything else. I think that those are some of the most important things that we can do. And the last thing I'll say too is, be realistic about the life we're living right now, that we're all living and sheltering. But 2 things, tap into the things you enjoy doing. You used to love going to the movies. You're not going to movies right now. My husband and I are looking at is there anything at the drive-in, or the Netflix, right, doing their Netflix, whatever. Find the things that you enjoy, that you used to enjoy doing, and see if you can find ways to adapt them, for now. And also, as people have said as well, think of it as an opportunity. It's an opportunity to discover new things you may not have tried before, or, but link into the things you enjoy, what you enjoy about them. Become your own self cheerleader, your own self coach. Encourage yourself, smile in the mirror, and work on developing a habit of positive self-talk and self-encouragement.
Excellent, Dr. Angela Celeste May. That's why we come to you, because you're the expert. You always
Oh.
give us great advice. See, so tell us what you have coming up and share with us how to reach you.
Well, thank you so much for asking. I am at this moment. I'm in the process of doing the edits with my filmmaker on the latest music video for one of the songs from my last album, my second album, Introducing the Lady, which you can find on iTunes and Spotify and Reverb Nation / Angela Celeste May. So I'm working on that, and I'm not saying who's on it because that's going to be like a little surprise, who the music video, is on. But I'm working on that, as well as working with my sister, my partner in AMA and Associates Incorporated, which is our counseling, consulting, and coaching company. So we're working on developing we're going to do our first 3-day like event in January, and it's helping creative professionals do a reset for moving forward in whatever their creativity may be for the year. So that's a couple of things I'm working on, and some other irons in the fire, but thank you for asking. I can be reached at AMA and Associates Incorporated. Actually, what is our AMAassociates.com. AMAassociates.com to get to our website. You can also reach me at Reverb Nation / Angela Celeste May as well. And also I would say Celeste, my middle name, CELESTE, and then MUS, which is short for music. M as in Mary. So Celeste MUS on the number 1 at AOL.com. If you want to email me about anything, but that's what I use for my music stuff. So you can email me about different things there. So that's a little something.
And you have a book as well. You have to tell us about.
Yes, I do. Thank you for asking. And I set it aside, which is right here. Thank you so much for asking again.
You're welcome.
Yes. Yes, Freedom. It's called Freedom. What is the experience of living without the negative self-imposed limitations? And it is, I interviewed a small group of people who were stuck in different areas of their life, personal, professional, etc., and who through different ways evolved and grew to the point where they felt unstuck. So they shared their stories of why they were stuck in the first place, things that they learned. And so 7 key themes came out of this research that I did. And everyone who reads it, people find it very helpful. What I think is so interesting about it is it's applicable to just all lots of different areas of life because the themes are fairly universal in terms of the human experience. So you can find this at Amazon.com. It's also in an ebook as well. So thank you for asking.
No problem. You're a dynamo. We got to cover it.
Oh,
We have so many wonderful things going on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Angela Celeste May, for being on the show. And I'm sure
Thank you.
next month we will have a fascinating topic to go over, especially because we'll be going into the holidays.
Yes, that's true. That is true. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. So thank you for watching the Kim B. Davis Show. We hope that you will join us on our next episode. And as always, remember, be magnificent.